It's like watching a CEO walk into a boardroom, look straight at the board, and say, "I can spend whatever I want, whether you approve it or not." Now imagine that CEO isn't running a company, he's running a country. And the board, that's Congress. So here's the question. What happens when a president openly says he can bypass the very institution designed to check his power? This is not a normal policy debate. This is not a routine press exchange. This is a live stress test of constitutional limits playing out in real time with Donald Trump at the center of it. Because when Donald Trump was asked whether he needed congressional approval to build the border wall, he didn't hedge, he didn't deflect, he said he could declare a national emergency and move forward, fast. That statement matters, not just for what it says, but for what it quietly assumes. It assumes the system will hold, or worse, that it won't resist. And for a moment, it almost sounded like the system might just absorb it. No immediate collapse, no constitutional alarm bells ringing in public, just a statement, clean, direct, unsettling. But power doesn't get tested in the moment it's claimed. It gets tested in the moment someone decides to push back. And that moment came, not from a courtroom, but from the United States Senate. In 2019, after that emergency declaration was no longer hypothetical but real, the Senate took a vote, not symbolic, not procedural, a real vote to terminate that national emergency. The result wasn't close, it wasn't partisan noise, it was 59 to 41. 59 senators, enough to send a message so loud it didn't need to be shouted. And buried inside that number was something even more disruptive. 12 Republicans crossing the line, stepping away from their own party's president. That's not routine disagreement, that's structural resistance. Because here's the contradiction no one could ignore. On one side, Donald Trump saying he could act without Congress. On the other, Congress, his own party included, saying no, you can't. And yet, the story doesn't end with that vote. Because after 59 senators rejected the emergency, Donald Trump did something that exposed the next layer of the system. He vetoed it. He overrode the override attempt. Which raises a sharper question: if a majority of the Senate says stop, but the president says no, who is actually in control? That's where the math stops being abstract and starts becoming dangerous. Because 59 sounds powerful until you realize it's not enough. Not enough to override a veto, not enough to force compliance, not enough to close the loop that the Constitution was designed to create. You don't need a simple majority to stop a president, you need 67 votes. And suddenly, that moment of resistance in 2019 starts to look less like a victory, and more like a warning shot that didn't land. Because the system worked, partially, it spoke, but it couldn't enforce. Now fast forward to 2026. Different issue, different stakes, same underlying question: how far can presidential power stretch before something snaps? This time it wasn't about a wall, it was about military escalation in Venezuela. A War Powers Act resolution hit the Senate floor, and once again, the numbers told the story before anyone else did. 52 to 47. 52 senators voted to block further escalation, and once again, Republicans crossed the line, 5 of them from completely different ideological corners of the party. You had Josh Hawley, often aligned with the most nationalist wing. You had Rand Paul, a libertarian who has built his brand on limiting federal power. You had Susan Collins representing a more traditional institutional Republican voice. Different philosophies, different political incentives, same decision, push back. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern forming in plain sight. And if you're paying attention, the pattern gets even tighter when you look at Iran. 2 separate votes, 2 near misses. 47 to 48, 48 to 52. Close enough to feel the pressure, not close enough to change the outcome. And that's the uncomfortable truth buried inside all of this. The Senate is resisting, but not decisively, speaking, but not concluding. It's like watching someone repeatedly reach for the emergency brake, but never pulling it all the way down. Now step back and look at the trajectory. 2019, 59 votes against emergency powers. 2026, 52 votes against military escalation. Iran, hovering just below the line. The numbers aren't random, they're drifting. Not collapsing, not exploding, drifting. And in a system built on thresholds, drifting is everything. Because each one of those votes is testing the same boundary, Where does executive authority end, and where does congressional authority begin? And here's where the logic tightens. Under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, Congress controls two things that matter more than anything else in this conversation: money and war. Not suggestions, not recommendations, control. So, when a president moves funds under a national emergency, or escalates military posture without explicit authorization, it doesn't just raise political questions. It triggers constitutional friction, and that friction is exactly where these crossover votes are coming from. Not loyalty, not rebellion. Something more precise. A recalibration. A recalibration that doesn't look dramatic on camera, but cuts deeper than any speech. Because this isn't about one president, it's about whether the system still has the capacity to correct itself when power starts leaning too far in one direction. Think about what these votes actually represent, not headlines, not party conflict, real consequences, decisions about war, decisions about billions in federal funds, decisions that don't stay inside Washington, they land somewhere, on someone. A family watching a deployment notice arrive, a community wondering where allocated money disappeared, a voter realizing that a temporary emergency can quietly become a permanent workaround. That's the moral line buried underneath the math. On one side, a president asserting speed, flexibility, control. On the other, a legislature trying, sometimes inconsistently, sometimes imperfectly, to slow things down and reassert authority. And right in the middle of that tension is the public, not abstract, not symbolic, real people living with the outcome of decisions they didn't make. So when you hear 59 votes, or 52 votes, or just a few short on Iran, understand what's really being measured. Not popularity, not momentum. Restraint. How much restraint is left in the system before it either holds or gives way? Because the gap to 67 votes isn't just political math, it's the distance between a warning and an enforcement mechanism. And here's the question no one can comfortably answer: if that gap never closes, then what exactly is stopping the next escalation? If moments like this matter to you, if you care about where power begins and where it's supposed to end, like the video, share it, and subscribe. Because these aren't isolated events, they're signals, and the pattern is still unfolding.